And welcome everyone to another edition of Radio Classics Interviews on the Crimson Tide Sports Network. This is Roger Hoover, and this series is always brought to you by Alabama One Credit Union. They've been voted Tuscaloosa's best credit union and best mortgage lender. Alabama One offers low-rate auto, mortgage, and business loans, plus protection for it all with Alabama One Insurance. You can visit any of their 9 local branches or check them out online at alabama1.org. Alabama One, a proud supporter of Crimson Tide Athletics. We continue going through some of the great games of the Saban era, and coming up, already available in podcast form on RollTide.com, but also you'll hear it on the radio on Saturday across the state. It's the 2012 BCS title game between Alabama and LSU from the Superdome in New Orleans. And starting for the Crimson Tide at left tackle in that game, Barrett Jones joins us now here live on our Facebook page. And Barrett, first of all, Roll Tide. How's everything going for you?
Roll Tide, Roger. How we doing, man?
Doing pretty well. I know this has been a crazy time for you, not only with the pandemic and everyone staying at home, but also you're a new father. How's the little one doing at home?
He's doing great. He's about 3 weeks. He's exactly 3 weeks old now, and so it's been a really fun journey being a dad and learning a lot about what that means. And you know, one of the keys is having a great woman by your side. So I've got a great wife who also graduated from Alabama, by the way, and she's really doing a great job. So we've been having a lot of fun and learning a lot about being parents, getting a little bit of sleep. But overall, it's been a great experience.
Well, we're certainly glad to hear that. And for you, just what's been your reaction to everything in the sports world just shutting down? You know, Alabama was getting ready for the start of spring practice, and all those plans have really had to be put on hold due to this pandemic.
Yeah, it's been a really unusual time, you know, I think for everybody in some way. And obviously, college football, you know, has been affected in the offseason. We'll see if it's affected more than just that. It'll be really interesting to watch the way it all unfolds. There's so many different variables that go into it, and I think it's definitely very unprecedented. Hard to know how to react. So my other job is I'm actually a financial advisor, and it's been very crazy in that scene as well, just because the market's been very volatile. So I've just been trying to take this time to really kind of reflect on what's important. Spend a lot of time with family, invest in relationships, and maybe try to get recentered and refocused, because hopefully, as we start being able to return to at least a sense of normalcy, we'll have learned something from this time, because it's been pretty crazy.
Certainly has been, and that included last week the NFL draft. Just what was your reaction to Alabama, first of all, having so many first-rounders? 4 of the first 15 picks were former Alabama players, and then really strong performances the rest of the draft. So a lot of Alabama players taking that next step.
Yeah, I don't think it was very unusual. You know, if you've watched any of the drafts really in the last few years, a lot of the guys get drafted, and Coach Saban does a fantastic job, obviously, of identifying talent as a great recruiter, but he also does a great job of developing those guys. And so not surprising that a lot of those guys got drafted. I think that will continue to happen as long as he's there, because he does a great job, like I said, of finding them and training them and getting the best out of them. So it was an exciting night. I think it's always fun to watch those guys. I think, obviously, especially Tua, just because there was so much drama surrounding him, and it was great to see him get drafted, be a top 5 pick, and I thought it was well deserved. And I thought the Dolphins got even maybe a steal there with Tua at number 5 with his kind of talent. So he's a great kid, and I've enjoyed watching him, and obviously the other guys as well. And like you said, there were several other guys who went in rounds just after that that are great players also.
So as we start to go back, and again, without games being broadcast on the weekends due to this shutdown at the moment, we've been going through the classic games of the Nick Saban era, and it started back in 2008 with the Clemson game, and I understand you redshirted that year. Just what are some of your early memories of how things started to turn around in the early years of the Saban era?
Yeah, absolutely. That 2008 year was really fun. Obviously, for me, it was a whole new world there, going from high school to college, and kind of figuring out what college football is all about. I went to a medium-sized Christian high school here in Memphis, and obviously the competition, I think for anybody, but especially coming from that environment, was a huge jump. But it was really, that was kind of the selling point for me, was to be a part of something special and to be a part of building a culture. And I felt like that group of guys that I came in with that year was extremely special. I know that's been talked about a lot, and so many great guys in that class who were awesome teammates, awesome people, and great football players. And so it was really fun to come in that first year and kind of feel like a lot of those guys were contributing right away. I redshirted, but a lot of them played right away, like Julio and Dante and Mark Ingram and some of those other guys, Courtney Upshaw, Mark Barron. A lot of those guys got playing time pretty immediately. I didn't play, obviously, but just getting to watch the way that things were starting to change, you could really sense that we were building something special. And so I think that was really fun. And that senior class that year did a great job of kind of laying the groundwork. Guys like John Parker and Antoine Caldwell and Rashad. There were some really special players who bought in, and what could have been a tough situation for a lot of those guys because a new coach, obviously, that didn't recruit you, but they really bought in and wanted to become part of laying the groundwork for the future, and did a great job. And we're very close that year to getting to an opportunity to win a national championship. But I think the way that '08 all unfolded, obviously beat Clemson that opening game, but then ended up losing to Florida in the SEC championship game. I think that just kind of fueled us and gave us a belief that we could really play with anybody, and really kind of set up that run really for those next few years.
Yeah, it set up a really special season for the Crimson Tide in 2009. There's been a couple other games from what we've been airing on Saturdays across the state. Obviously, the Tennessee game, but then the Auburn game as well. Let's talk quickly about the Iron Bowl from 2009. What do you remember about that final drive as Alabama was able to use so much clock, go so far down the field to set up the winning touchdown?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite games. That really was a lot of fun to be a part of, and I just kind of remember there being a sense on the sidelines of confidence that we really felt like we were going to be able to move the ball down the field and score. I remember we just kind of all looked at each other and kind of realized that if we were going to do it, it kind of needed to be now. And essentially, we just started throwing to Julio in a lot of crossing routes, and then we had a really great screenplay, where we called him in man coverage and knew that it would be a good option there in that 2-minute situation. I think Josh Bynes had Trent man-to-man and able to get on him and block him and sprung him free. That kind of moved us down and really into the scoring area. So it was a really fun drive. And then I remember I'm trying to remember the name of the play. I think it was North Peter Pass was the name of the play that scored to Roy Upchurch. I loved when we I think that in some ways the traditional maybe Alabama play there would have been to run the football again, just take more time off the clock. But I loved when he called that play, just knowing that we were going to throw the football. I thought it was a great call, and obviously it worked out really well because they stacked the box, and Roy just kind of slipped out in the flats, and Greg did a great job of putting it on him and walking in the end zone. So I don't think anyone wanted to give the ball to him there with only needing a field goal to win. We've seen how that's gone in the past, and not so well. So or I don't think anyone wanted to kick a field goal there either. Now that was maybe a little before some of our field goal issues, but it always just feels better to score touchdowns in those kind of situations. You take out some room for error. So it definitely was a special moment, and I think just a huge sense of relief when that game was over, because we knew we were so focused all year on getting back and getting an opportunity to play Florida, and we knew that we had earned that chance. So it really was a great moment, and it always feels good to go down to Jordan-Hare and win too. It's a fun environment to win on the road.
Absolutely, and then you back it up with the win against Florida, the win over Texas to win the national championship, Alabama's first since 1992, and then you guys go through the 2010 season again, played at a very high level, some tight losses down the stretch. But how were you guys feeling in spring practice of 2011, and then how did things change after the events and the tragic tornado on April 27th?
Yeah, to start off, I think we were really frustrated just because I think we felt like 2010 probably of all the teams I played on, probably the most talented team by far. I mean, so many great players in that team, and didn't feel like we really achieved what we should have. And so I think there was a lot of frustration and a lot of motivation going into that year. And then obviously with what happened in the tornado, I think that just was an extra layer of motivation where we really prepared extremely hard in that offseason. Felt like we had a lot to play for. And there was an overwhelming sense that we knew we had a really good group coming back. And I think, if I know the 2009 team was undefeated, but if you made me pick which was the best team I played on, probably that 2011 team, just because of how good that defense was. I think that was one of the greatest defenses of all time, maybe the greatest defense, with so many guys on that team. And we knew that it was going to be we were going to be really tough to beat that year. Obviously, we did have the one loss to LSU, but then we were able to avenge it again. But that was a fun year because it was just probably the most focus of any year I was there. Just everybody was on a mission. They knew what they wanted to accomplish, and thankfully able to get it done there at the end.
What can you tell us about the transition that you had to go through going from right guard to left tackle? Obviously, it was successful because Alabama was able to run the ball really well. You win the Outland Trophy, but for you, what was that transition like?
It was hard. I remember I'd been at right guard for 2 seasons, 2009, 2010, and about halfway through spring practice, the situation we had at left tackle wasn't working out very well. And basically they said, really, it wasn't halfway. It was with about 3 practices to go in spring practice, and they decided that, hey, we got to find someone to play left tackle. They asked me if I would do it. I was reluctant, and I really didn't want to do it mostly because I knew I was going to have to block Courtney Upshaw the entire spring game if I did it. And that guy had one of the heaviest heads of all time. He just really would come in there, and that bull rush was tough to stop. And so, I was very, very wary of doing that initially. But they moved me out there. I got killed the very first day of practice. Felt like I got dominated by him, and did not want to go back. The next day got a little bit easier, and then in the spring game actually ended up having a pretty good game. And I think the media members made me the player of the game or something like that, just because I'd moved to left tackle. It was my first time there, and did okay, I guess. So after that, they just kind of decided to keep me there, and so I kind of was kicking and screaming, but eventually got used to it and ended up really liking it. It was a fun position to play, and probably my favorite position. I'm not athletic enough to really play it, but I enjoyed being out there, and I made do. And I guess I won the Outland, so it worked out okay.
Yeah, it certainly did. And Alabama goes on to win the national championship. You mentioned before the LSU loss at Bryant-Denny Stadium here in Tuscaloosa. What were your main takeaways from that night?
Yeah, that was an incredible night. I would just say missed opportunities. That's what I think about it, man. I think more about just the game itself. I remember so much of it. First of all, I had a really bad high ankle sprain like the second quarter, which was very painful. The rest of the game, or maybe it was the third quarter, somewhere in there, that was really hard, and was thankfully able to kind of play through it. But so that made the game a little bit blurry, I guess, just because that was hurting so bad. But I just remember we kept getting, we were driving the ball pretty well the entire game. We'd get down to the 30-yard line and we'd stall out and try long field goals. And then obviously that play where we threw it to Michael Williams, kind of the trick play down there, and Eric Reed came up with a great interception. There was just so many moments in that game where it felt like we should have won the game, and felt like we were the better team really coming out of it, but weren't able to do it. So it was an incredible atmosphere. Probably one of the loudest I've ever heard the stadium. Just the lead up was really unlike any regular season game I've ever been a part of. Maybe really unlike any game. There was just so much lead up that week, and probably in some ways maybe got a little bit too into it, just listening to everything that was going on, and just focused on the next time around on just executing, and it worked out much better.
Yeah, it certainly did. And a lot of people had the takeaway that night that these are the best 2 teams in college football. LSU goes on to win the division, win the SEC, but then how excited were you guys when you saw the BCS rankings come out, knowing you would have a shot at that rematch, especially in New Orleans?
We were very excited. I remember one of the coolest memories I have from that year is that we were in the team hotel on a Friday night. I think this was the right year. And Oklahoma State, who was number 2 at the time, they lost to Iowa State in Ames on a Friday. Mm-hmm. And I remember everyone just went out to the hallways and just started running around screaming, because we knew we were going to have an opportunity probably to play for the national championship again. And that was a really cool moment, because before that it was probably going to be Oklahoma State who was going to get a shot at LSU, and we were very mad because we felt like we were a lot better than them. And then just fortunate that they lost to Iowa State, and I will never forget just hugging random people in the hallway because we were just so excited about what happened, and it was really cool. So yeah, we were pumped that we got another opportunity. It was a really weird national championship just because the first time against Texas, I was so many nerves. Obviously, first national championship, just thinking about all the things that could happen or go wrong and go right. Your mind kind of goes to those places. This time, though, I really knew what to expect. Right, we already played them, and familiar place there, and obviously the Superdome. So it was it almost felt like an SEC game, very different than maybe a usual national championship. So not really a lot of nerves going into that game. Honestly, just was excited to go out there and get another opportunity against those guys. And I think there was a lot of confidence on our side going in that we really felt like we were going to be able to beat them.
And you're able to move down the field throughout that ball game, and it did end a lot of Alabama field goals, but you guys were also, it seemed like, on the field so much because the defense was able to do its job, get a lot of quick 3-and-outs as LSU wouldn't get past midfield until very, very late in the game after it was already 21-0. But just what was the feeling on offense knowing that you were right on the door for the end zone, and it did result in points ultimately with all the field goals?
Well, I remember we scored that first touchdown there late in the game where Trent broke out to the left side, and that was a huge sigh of relief because we finally, in 2 games, found the end zone. Now, it's hard for me, honestly, to imagine a national championship that will ever be like that again, or really a high-quality regular season game, just because of how offense has changed so much. Where you really, if you think about the first game, no touchdowns, and a number 1 versus number 2 matchup, I'd be surprised if we ever see that again, really, just because of the trajectory of college football. So it was definitely a different kind of game. I know that maybe young fans wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, but it was great football, and there was a lot of good offense being played too. It was just 2 really good defenses. So it definitely, that defense, like I said, they were awesome. They were the best defense I've ever seen in college football. I'm sure there's a lot that I didn't see of olden times, but those guys were incredible, just so dominant, very complete, didn't really have any weaknesses, and just so many great players and great leaders on that defense. So very lucky to have those guys, and I think that was a very, very special group right there. I can't remember I'm trying to remember how many points they allowed, but it wasn't many. It was under 10, I think, a game. And there was a bunch of studs on that side of the ball, so they made it easy for us on offense, and in some ways kind of dictated the way we played offense that year. Probably maybe could have scored more points in some ways, but we really didn't need to. Ran the football a lot and took a lot of clock off and just relied on that great defense, and it ended up working because we won a national championship.
And for you as a lineman, you're able to do your job, and then behind you in the backfield, Trent Richardson, Eddie Lacy, they're able to do some really special things. You mentioned Trent's touchdown run, but what was it like blocking for guys like that who you knew had the ability to continue? Just once you did your job, they're going to take off, and it could be a long run.
It was incredible. I mean, I had so many great players that I blocked for at Alabama. I mean, people ask me who my running back was when I was there. I say, well, really had Mark Ingram, Trent Richardson, Eddie Lacy, T.J. Yeldon. Those were my main ones. So I had so many great guys who I blocked for. It was they definitely made it easy, and if we just gave them a crease, they would normally do the rest. So it made it really, really easy to play offensive line in a lot of ways. Maybe not really easy, but somewhat easier, just because they made you look good a lot, and great guys to really play with too, because they're great teammates. We really had the concept of using 2 running backs was somewhat around, but it wasn't as popular as it is now. And Coach Saban really kind of, in a lot of ways, I think, pushed that. And other teams kind of saw the way we were doing it, where we were really sharing the football a lot, not really usually featuring really 2 players in most of the games I played in. And everybody was able to get less carries, but still have a lot of success, and it kept those other guys fresh. So. It definitely was a potent running attack, and it was fun to be a part of it.
As we start to wrap things up, it's hard to win a national championship. Obviously, you're able to do that in 2009, but then you guys win the title in 2011, and then you're able to repeat as national champions, another dominant win in a national championship game the next year against Notre Dame. Just how much pride do you have in being able to back up this win against LSU with the season you all had in 2012, and you got to finish your career on back-to-back national championship teams?
Yeah, a lot of pride. I think there was we knew that what had happened in 2010 and the way that we had, in a lot of ways, failed to be prepared and be focused going into that year. And so there was a huge sense after 11 where we really didn't even celebrate that much. The guys that were coming back. I remember Coach Saban called a meeting like 3 days after, and he said, "All right, rip the rearview mirror off, the past. We're on to the next year." It was very Bill Belichick-ish, where we're on to Cincinnati kind of, and that was the feeling that, hey, we hadn't even had the parade yet. He was like, the parade's tomorrow, and I want you guys to enjoy the parade, but after that, I don't want to hear any more about 2011. I want us to be focused on 2012. And for me, as a senior, first of all, at that point, I wasn't sure if I was coming back, but decided to come back and really wanted to be a captain and get an opportunity to kind of lead a team in some ways to a national championship. And so that was really special for me, and I wanted to leave Alabama the right way. So it really meant a lot to me to be able to do it one last time and finish it off the right way against Notre Dame. So I can't imagine a better way to end a college career, 4 years starting, 3 national championships. I tell people all the time how blessed I was to be able to play with so many great players. Sometimes I felt like I was the worst guy on the field talent-wise, but we made it work because there were so many great teammates on that team and guys who really were able to sacrifice some individual things for team greatness. And so all in all, it's a lot to be proud of, I think, for that whole group. And I think back a lot of times to that that recruiting class in '08 and just how many of those guys were able to kind of lay the foundation. I think that was really special, and it was something we really wanted to do. And I think there's a lot of pride that's taken in that class, especially I guess the first full class that Coach Saban had of really building some building blocks there to help there be a lot of special things to come. And obviously it's been fun to watch how that's all unfolded even since we've left. And obviously there's been a lot of great players who've kind of taken up the torch. So it's been a really cool run, and who knows, we might never see anything like it again in college football just because of how unique and special it's been.
Well, let's just hope we can get back to normal sooner rather than later and keep the momentum rolling during the Saban era. But Barrett, you were a key member of so many of those early teams, and we just thank you for your time today talking about the 2012 BCS National Championship victory the Crimson Tide had against LSU. Just best to you and your family, and Roll Tide.
Hey, Roll Tide. No, trust me, nobody's wanting it. I'm wanting it as much as a lot of you guys too. Just in my spare time, I'm an ESPN analyst. I worked this year for ESPN Radio, and the thought of not getting to call any games this year would be painful. So I've got a good feeling that we're going to find a way to play games in some way. We'll see how it goes, but I'm hoping for it as well. And thanks for having me on. It was fun chatting.
All right, Roll Tide to Barrett Jones, and we thank all of you for joining us here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network Facebook page. We'll have more quarantine Q&A interviews coming up next week, as well as another Radio Classics interview. Thanks for watching, everyone. Roll Tide.